Hello friends, brothers and sisters. Monday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time, lunch break for the soul. And we are basing our gatherings on Spiritism 101. It is this book that I know it's in the reverse, but you can get it in different Spiritist centers and websites. And we're also basing our information on the Spirits book, which was the first book by Allan Kardec. It consists of 1,019 questions that Allan Kardec asked the good spirits to get answers for the codification of Spiritism. And the third book we're basing our gathering on is Genesis, which was the last book that Allan Kardec wrote. So today's theme is God. What is God? Let's see what we can find out. Are you ready? All right, let's go. God. Spirits inform us that the harmony that regulates the universe, from atoms to galaxies, has an origin, an initial cause that generated it. All things, forms of life and planets obey perfect laws and thereby reveal the existence of an intelligence. This intelligent power is God. In short, the spiritual beings tell us that God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. The first question in the Spirits book that Allan Kardec asked is, what is God? And he did not ask, who is God? Or where is God? Or any other question. He did not anthropomorphize God. He asked, what is God? And what was the question? What was the answer to the question that came back? It was, God is the supreme intelligence, first cause of all things. And that's why we're reading the same thing here. The intelligent power is God. In short, the spiritual beings tell us that God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. That is important to note. Therefore, to measure the intelligence of God, just remember the pro-word that dictates. The worker is known by his or her work. In that case, to see the work, just look at the cosmos, the micro-universe, from molecules that are in our hands to the planet we inhabit. So we find out the level of the author's intelligence. And if we look at our universe, we can't, I think our limited minds can't even fathom the intelligence that's behind the formation, I want to say, the existence of this intricate, amazing system. And even just our bodies, if we look at our bodies and start understanding, researching what is going on in our bodies to fathom the intelligence that's behind it, I think it's incomprehensible. But let us move on. Since ancient times, human beings felt within themselves the existence of God. They were worshiping nature, and there were rituals, ceremonies, and primitive chanting. So the worshiping of God has always existed. It's nothing new. It just changed in its form, and the form kind of reflects the consciousness of us human beings. Humans are not yet able to understand the essential nature of God. Earlier, the idea of God was very simple. Humans attributed to God their own imperfections. So God felt anger, jealousy, he liked people, and he hated others. He was violent and judgmental. We know from Moses taught us, or taught the people of his times better yet, that God was to be feared, because God was a vengeful, judgmental God. Hence, the 10 Commandments tell people very much to do certain things and not to do other things. And it was all based on fear. But then came Jesus, and Jesus changed the idea about God completely. He taught the people of his times and us still today that God is a loving God. It's a parent, a loving parent that will always forgive us anytime and always, who always looks out and wants only the best for us. So as you can see, it is a very different model that came along with Jesus. As humans evolved, they acquired new values according to their reason and thus having a better understanding of God. And one thing is thanks to Jesus, who taught us a lot about God. So let us ask the following question then. Does God exist? Let me say hello to some of our friends here. Vanessa is watching. Hello, Vanessa. I'm only looking down because I have bifocals, so it looks a little weird. Then there's Gabriel Ignacio. Thanks for being here. Lovely to see you. There's Gabriel again. This radio is helping me a lot. It is helping me a lot too. We're so grateful to Kardec Radio that it exists and gives us so much stimulus, so many classes, so much information. And lastly, it connects us throughout the world. So thanks, let's say a big thank you to Kardec Radio and all the people in good spirits that are behind that. Yes. So now let's move on and let's see, does God really exist? This is a question that to these days everyone is asking. A lot of people are asking that. To believe in God, simply observe the works of creation. The universe exists. There is a cause. Doubting the existence of God would be to deny that every effect has a cause, and to presuppose the idea that something could be created from nothing. Now let us move over to the Spirit's book. Question number 4. And it is in chapter 1, 4th question, in the subchapter, Proofs of the Existence of God. So you're welcome to pull out the Spirit's book and follow along, or read all the questions that we will not read today to get an even better idea of what God is. So question 4 asks, where may we find proof for the existence of God? And the answer came back. In an axiom you apply to all your sciences, there is no effect without a cause. If you would search for the cause of whatever is not the work of human beings, then reason will answer your question. We know we're sitting on a chair, we're lying on a bed, there is a table we eat on, and we do know there is a cause for those parts in our lives. And all these pieces were created by humans. But when we go beyond those material aspects, and even looking at our own bodies and soul, even they have a cause, and that is God. To believe in God, we need only to behold the works of creation. The universe exists. Therefore, it must have a cause. To doubt God's existence would be to deny that every effect has a cause, and to believe that something could have resulted from nothingness. And we all know that nothingness does not have any intelligence, and we just learned that God is the supreme intelligence. So that must be then the cause for everything else that exists, which is the effect. Now let us go to question 5. All human beings have within them the intuitive sentiment of God's existence. What can we conclude from this? Here is the answer: that God exists. Otherwise, where would such a sentiment come from if it were not based on something real? This is an application of the principle that there is no effect without a cause. And we know that this particular law is a law that is scientific. So there is our proof. Now question 7. Could we find the first cause of the formation of things in the innermost properties of matter? In other words, could we look into the consistency of matter, to actually find out where it comes from? And here is the answer. Even if you could, what in turn would be the cause of those properties? Good answer, right? There must always be a first cause. So every atom, everything we're finding still has a cause. And that then goes back to God. To attribute the first formation of things to the innermost properties of matter would be to mistake the effect for the cause. Since such properties are themselves an effect, they must have had a prior cause. So we see that everything, even the minutest little part in this universe, can only be an effect. It must have been caused by something. So if we trace it back, we will always come back to God. Then I would like to go to Genesis, page 71. Genesis has a whole chapter on God. It is chapter 2, for those who are interested, on page 59. And it talks about the existence of God. And then it talks about the divine nature, which we will go into in a minute. And then it goes to, let's see, seeing God and it exists. Since God is everywhere, why can we not see God? Will we see God when we leave earth behind? Such are the questions that are asked every day, aren't they? We know people, and maybe we've even been asking these questions ourselves. The first is easy to answer. Our physical organs have limited perceptions that render them incapable of seeing certain things, even material ones, and we can attest to that. We can't see everything. We actually see very little with our physical organs. Thus, it is that certain fluids completely escape both our sight and our scientific instruments. Nevertheless, we do not doubt their existence. Section 32. Things of a spiritual essence cannot be perceived by physical organs. It is through spirit sight only that we can see the spirits and the things of the immaterial world. Thus, only our soul could have the perception of God. Will our soul see God immediately after death? That is what only the communications from beyond the grave can teach us. Through them, we know that seeing God is the privilege of the most purified souls, and that, therefore, very few, upon leaving their earthly envelope behind, possess the necessary degree of dematerialization. So even when we have passed on and left our earthly shell behind, it is only for the purest spirits to see God, to actually the privilege of seeing God. And our material eyes obviously escape seeing God completely. Because even when it comes to the air or certain molecules or certain fluidic existences, spirits, most of us cannot see with our eyes, our material eyes. But as we just learned, we can see them with our soul. This section was in Genesis. Now let us move on to the attributes of God. How is the nature of God? The inferiority of human faculties make it impossible for human beings to fully grasp the essential nature of God. But they can rather have some idea of the attributes of God, which are always in the highest degree. God must possess all these qualities in the supreme degree, because if one of them were short or not possessed to an infinite degree, the Creator would not be superior to everything, and thus would not be good. So let us see, what are the attributes of God? God is eternal, God is immutable. God is infinite, immaterial, unique, and all-powerful, supremely just and good. When we go over again to Genesis, I had mentioned earlier, there is a chapter called The Divine Nature. It is part of chapter 2, which explains in deepest details what is God. And of course, the Spirit's book, the first section of the Spirit's book, is also explaining the existence of God, the characteristics of God, and why God has to exist based on the law of cause and effect. So page 62 in the Spirit's book, we learn the following, a little more detailed, about the divine nature of God. God is the supreme and sovereign intelligence. That is the first aspect of God. Human intelligence is limited, since humans could neither make nor could they comprehend everything that exists. God's intelligence, embracing the infinite, must be infinite. If it were supposed that God was limited at any one point, then one could conceive of a still more intelligent being capable of comprehending and doing what the other could not, and so on and so forth, and ad infinitum, the spirits tell us. So God must be the supreme and sovereign intelligence. Second attribute is God is eternal. God is eternal means that God has no beginning and will not have any end. If God had had a beginning, God would have had to have sprung from nothingness. And we already know that nothingness does not have any intelligence. Consequently, since God is the supreme intelligence, it could have not sprung from nothingness. But nothingness being nothing, it cannot produce anything. Or God would have been created by another previously existing being, and therefore it is this other thing that would be God. So even if we would find a stage in the development, in the whole picture, that we could fathom, then there would have to be a being beyond it, because of the eternal aspect of God. If one were to suppose that God had a beginning or will have an end, then one could conceive of an entity having existed before God, or capable of existing after God, and so on ad infinitum. It is really hard to comprehend, I have to admit. I don't think our minds are capable, our brains are capable of really getting what infinity is. And in one section, in chapter 1 in Alan Kardec's Spirits book, the spirits actually say that we don't have our faculties yet to really understand. But we're doing our best here to get a good picture of the definition of God. And that's all we're doing. So the third attribute is God is immutable. If God were subject to change, the laws that govern the universe would have no stability. I don't think we can even imagine what that would mean. Waking up in the morning and there's no sun, for example. We can't even imagine that. So this is the only stability we know of. Everything else always changes, and we know that too. It's immutable. The fourth attribute of God is that God is immaterial, meaning that God's nature differs from everything that we call matter. So God differs from everything we know that is matter. Otherwise, God would not be immutable, because God would be subject to the transformations of matter. And again, as I said earlier, matter always changes. Everything in matter always changes. But since God is immaterial and immutable, it cannot be part of nature, of matter. God has no form perceivable to our senses. Otherwise, God would be matter. We say the hand of God, the eye of God, the mouth of God, because humans, knowing only themselves, take themselves as terms of comparison for everything they do not understand. It is part of our mental limitation that we project our own beings on others, on God as well. Those images in which God is represented as an old man with a long beard and dressed in a robe are absurd, the spirits tell us. Their drawback is that they lower the Supreme Being to the meager proportions of humanity. From that starting point to endowing God with all the passions of humanity and to making God out to be angry and jealous, there's only a small step. So the more we project ourselves, primarily in ancient times, the more we project ourselves on God, the more off we are, the less justice we're doing, the immensity that God actually is. The fifth attribute is God is all-powerful. If God did not possess supreme power, one could conceive of a more powerful being, and so on and so forth, until one encountered the being that no other could surpass in power, and that being would be God again. So every time we go up the ladder, we will be reaching God. The sixth attribute, God is supremely just and good. The providential wisdom of the divine laws is revealed in the tiniest things as well as in the greatest. And that wisdom allows no doubt about either God's justice or goodness. The seventh attribute, I think I'm at the seventh, right? I lost track. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, the seventh is God is infinitely perfect. It is impossible to conceive of a God without infinite perfections, without which God would not be God, because one could always conceive of a being possessing what God lacked. In order for no other being to surpass God, God must be infinite in everything. God's attributes being infinite, they're not susceptible to increasing or diminishing. Absolute constancy. Otherwise, they would not be infinite, and God would not be perfect. If the least fragment of just one of God's attributes were removed, the least fragment, the tiniest little particle, probably smaller than we can even imagine, God would no longer be God, since a more perfect being could exist. And then that more perfect being again would be God. And they say ad infinitum, forever and ever. The eighth attribute, God is unique. God's oneness is the consequence of the absolute infiniteness of God's perfection. Another God could not exist except in the condition of being equally infinite in all respects, because if between them there were the slightest difference, one would be inferior to the other, subordinate to the other power. So in its uniqueness, God's is perfect, and another God could not exist except in the condition of the equal infinite uniqueness. And if it didn't, then that would be subordinate to God. And if we could find something even more unique, then that would be God. If there were absolute equality between both, there would be throughout all eternity one and the same thought, one and the same will, and one and the same power. Thus, merged in their identity, there would in reality be only one God. So the idea that there is many different gods is diffused by this section alone. Because if we would find equally eternal, immutable, good, infinite energies, something like God, then they would be the same. And then it would be just, they would be one again. Can you follow me? It's like an equation, like a mathematical equation. If either one had a special attribute, one would do that the other did not, and then there would not be the perfect equality between them, since neither one nor the other would possess sovereign authority, and then whatever would be above the other then would be God again. Here is the 9th attribute of God. It was ignorance of the principle of the infiniteness of God's perfection that gave rise to polytheism, the religion of all primitive peoples, because we know that God is all-powerful and supremely just and good. They attributed, those primitive people, divinity. They attributed divinity to every power that seemed above humanity. Later, reason led them to fuse all those various powers into only one. Then, to the degree that humans understood the essence of the divine attributes, they abolished from their symbols the beliefs that were the denial of one sole God. In sum, God cannot be God except under the condition that God cannot be surpassed in anything by another being. I say that again. God cannot be God in sum, God cannot be God except under the condition that God cannot be surpassed. So God cannot be surpassed in anything by another being. Because then the being that surpasses God in whatever form or shape would be God, and even if it was just by a hair's breadth. That is why it is necessary that God be infinite in all things. So this is a nice summary that actually explains to us the reason for infinity as well. It is thus in God's existence being proven by the fact of God's work that through a simple logical deduction one arrives at determining the attributes that characterizes God. It's actually really simple, so logical. I love how Kardec explains this in such a scientific, clear, and logical way. It helps me. God is therefore, and we're going to mention to you one more time the attributes of God. God is therefore the supreme and sovereign intelligence. God is unique, eternal, immutable, immaterial, all-powerful, supremely just and good, infinite in all God's perfection, and it can be in no other way. So be it. So this concludes our... Actually, there's one more thing I want to say. There is question 622 in the Spirits book. And Allan Kardec asked the spirits, where is God's law written? For those of you who know the answer, you may answer to yourself. Where is God's law written? Very important question and very eye-opening. Is it written in a holy book? At some parchment or grave? No. The spirits replied that it is written in our conscience. God's law is written in our conscience. Thus, all humans have within themselves God's law. And if we look further into good and evil in the Spirits book and the explanations, we learn that Allan Kardec asks, so then humans, sorry, we got interrupted here for a moment, have an ability to not all of us know really how to discern good from evil. And Allan Kardec asks, so how can people, human beings who are so prone to mistakes, know what's good and evil, even though God's law is written in our conscience? And the answer was, follow the golden rule, and you will always be in safe territory. And what is the golden rule? The golden rule is, do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. Shall we take that into our next week and see that we will incorporate a little bit more God into our lives, in our beings, in our relationships, and the vastness and beauty and love that God helps us with and surrounds us with all the time, 24/7. And let us practice the golden rule for us to get closer to God, to perfect our actions, to work on our perfection in our soul, of our souls, by following the golden rule. Let us do unto others as we would like them to do unto us. Shall we? I wish you a beautiful week, and thank you so much for listening. Much love, and God bless you. Take care.